welcome everyone to hell. I am deeply appreciative to everybody in the series. What I've heard has been a real success for all of us, and I'm grateful for that. We have been traversing a lot of territory, and congratulations to you for speaking it through. We have one more session in June. So a 12-second review, and I want to introduce our presenters. We started out by just considering what are the foundations of our afterlife beliefs in the Christian church. And we spent some time in the scriptures, and we discovered that there is no definitive, clear, or even orthodox teaching in scripture about the afterlife, and we understood that to be basically good news. Because that allows for, and this is key, the indeterminacy of what Scripture tells us about the afterlife allows for our own experiences to be informative to us. That will be helpful for us in our next session, where I'm hoping all of us can join in and just start sharing our own perspectives, our own experiences, our own insights into what we are as souls and what our fate and our destiny might be. We then took a look at just the nature of the soul itself, and we realized that even in philosophical and theological traditions, it's not well defined, which again is good news. We have parameters, that's about it. And we took a look at some of the other pre-modern notions of the soul and the afterlife from the medieval era, which was so defining for our understandings. Next session, I want us to all get together if we can and just share our own thoughts about what do we make of all this. But in the meantime, it is true that afterlife beliefs have a deep impact. Like if we say, what's the point of this series? Well, afterlife beliefs do have an impact, if I may say, on our soul now. And we are blessed to have two theologically practitioners of soul care to help us understand more about that. Richard Rubin and Dana Rubin, the floor is yours.
Well, as Bill says, we've covered a lot of ground, and we're going to cover a bit more. And so if I'm flooding you as Bill has, that's just the way it is. So we're going to look at psychology, and psychology is a lens in which to look at our human experience and understand why we think and feel the way we do, and the insights that have come through that. Psychology comes from two Greek roots, psyche, meaning soul or mind, and logos, which means literally word, or more broadly, a study. So psychology is the study of the soul or study of the mind. All right, and as a discipline of study, psychology really emerged in the 20th century. Three great pioneers, all Germanic in origin. Alfred Adler, he's an Austrian psychiatrist. He looked at people as they're connected within communities. He said that we all have this community feeling that we're seeking. We're seeking to be connected. In German, Gemeindegefühl. Sigmund Freud, who I think we probably all have had some exposure to, he was an Austrian neurologist and was the founder of psychoanalysis. But one of his key contributions was saying that our psyches have a structure, that there are elements that we can look at to see how they interact with one another. He said there are basically three parts to the psyche. There's the id, which is the unformed energy and that goes. There's the ego that develops as we develop as children, as well as the superego, which is an internalized moral stance in life. So these three interact with one another. And he says that the basic energy which drives a person is the libido, that there is an energy that moves us through life. And he considered it from the lens of a sexual energy, but more broadly, it's that life force or energy that moves us with desire. And the third one, Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, and he was at times a colleague of Freud's, but then they had split because their ideas were somewhat different. But his basic point is that to mature in life is to become individuated, which means to move from an unconscious way of living to a conscious way of living. And so to look at the unseen things and find a way of discovering them through dreams, through conversations and all. So those are the three pioneers, and they continue to have influence for later study. Carl Jung probably is still the one who's most consulted, particularly in areas of soul care and soul life. There were subsequent theories in developmental psychology, and we'll just go through a few of them just to give an idea. I think we probably have all heard of Abraham Maslow. He is famous for this hierarchy of needs. He said that our growth in life is dependent upon how these needs are met, and you can't have higher needs met unless the lower ones are met first. And so he says the most basic needs that we have are physiological ones, just to survive as animals, as persons. Air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, and reproduction. Once those needs are somewhat secure for us, we can move to a next level, which is safety needs. A sense of personal security, employment, resources, health, and property. Those being somewhat met, then we can move to another level, love and belonging, where we have friendship, intimacy, family, and a sense of connection within our families and our communities. The next level of need is esteem, that we have respect from others and self-esteem, a sense of status and recognition, strength and freedom. If those things are essentially met in our lives, then we can move on to his top level, which is self-actualization, or the desire to become the most that one can be. And he says, though this scheme of needs somewhat is true for all people, that there's a certain hierarchy, and as they're met, we can find ourselves going into higher levels of personal integration and maturity. Another way of looking at our development is, how do we develop morally, our sense of morality? And Lawrence Kohlberg is famous for his 6 steps or 6 stages of moral development. He says the first level level 1 is pre-conventional, and there are 2 levels to that. The first is punishment and obedience orientation. Obey the rules to avoid punishment. First thing the children know. You don't want to get time out because you're doing bad things. Step 2, 1 level up, is seeking pleasure. What Kohlberg calls naive hedonism. Conforms to get rewards and have favors returned. So a little step up from avoiding punishment, what I'm going to when I get the goods. And that's from young children younger than 6, up to 6 years of age. The conventional level of morality, level 2, is from 7 to 11 years, he says. Step 3, the first level, good boy, good girl morality, conforms to avoid disapproval or dislike by others. So either authorities, adults, or peer pressure. Step 4, conform to avoid censure by authority. So not wanting to be censured by teachers, policemen, whoever might have some ability to impose some sort of censure on you. And then from the age of 11 on, there's this 3rd level, post-conventional. Step 5 conforms to maintain communities, emphasis on individual rights. A sense that that more is in the world than myself, and that somehow I benefit when we're conforming to have a good sense of how we get along with one another. And then the highest level, he says, is our individual principles of conscience. What do I believe in my own way of thinking is the best way that I can live and for others to live with me? Okay, Dana, would you like to talk about Erickson?
Okay. So this is Erickson's psychosocial stages, and he was the one that termed identity crisis. So with his stages, in every stage you're growing and learning the skills needed to get through that particular time in your life, and then and if you're successful in managing the trials of infancy, early childhood, adolescence, you are supposed to come out healthy on the other side and take those skills with you throughout your life. And if you don't do well, say maybe you didn't learn the skills from earlier stages to deal with social situations, peers, your inner self, that can create havoc for the current stage you're in, and you will not be able to continue learning.
In each of these stages, there is a challenge. For example, in infancy, the basic task is to learn trust over mistrust. Do I have a basic sense of security in life, and I can trust those who are caring for me? Early childhood, the next stage, autonomy versus shame and doubt. Do I have a developing sense of person, of ego, that isn't overpowered by some sense of that I don't have worth, or that I'm really unsure about who I am as a person? Preschool, initiative versus guilt. Can I take a step out and actually do something and with some sense of creativity and agency, or am I limited by some sense that I may not do it right and have a problem with that?
Sorry, I found my notes. So, say with infancy, there's a trust versus mistrust. Are you having all your needs met? And if you have a caregiver that is not able to meet your needs, you're not gonna trust other people that come into your life that are supposed to be caregivers or leaders. And that mistrust also is within yourself. And it'll expand into every aspect of your life. If you do well, you have a caring parent or caregiver, and your needs are met, you'll walk out of this stage with what Erickson calls hope. And that gives you a more positive outlook and expectation. Early childhood, autonomy versus shame and doubt. This is when you're learning all your, you're learning to be yourself. And if you're shamed for being the toddler that you are, getting into things, not handled roughly, you're going to go through life with a lot of shame, and shame in things that are perfectly natural. A lot of children are shamed during their potty training stage, and that ends up coming out as adults, a lot of shame with their sexuality, afraid to explore and find out who they really are inside. And that, and then with a lot of the traditional messages from the church, that just constricts that person's identity even further. So with early childhood, and if you go through that health, in a healthy manner, you'll come out with will. You're feeling confident and self-sufficient. Preschool, initiative versus guilt. That's your exploration phase. So, preschool, it's chaotic, and you're just seeing what you can get away with, what you can do, and also that's when you're learning to be yourself, with your identity, and who you are with your peers. And as you test waters, there's also guilt. Like, I know I should be doing this, but I really want this. So it's your ego being developed as well. So without your if you manage to not feel too guilty, you come out of that with purpose. So one that I really want to focus on is the in terms of how people raised in church, and especially people in leadership roles, priests and religious leaders, a lot of them start going through their training during the adolescent stage, the identity versus role confusion. So during this stage, you are, like it says identity, you're trying to find out who you are and what's your place in the world, who you are inside your ego. And this is when you develop friendships, close relationships. You are able to learn how to articulate your deep inner emotions and develop close relationships with people that you can share those with. When, say like in the Catholic Church, adolescents, when they go into seminary, they don't get to explore and form these healthy relationships because they're taken out of their community. And I actually I'm going to read from my phone because I wrote it down, so I'm really sorry, because I don't want to screw it up. But many people who go into seminary end up getting stuck because they've been taken out of this. They're basically taken out of this community where they are to be developing a healthy sense of self. And they're put into a community where they are not allowed to develop healthy relationships with their peers, even if they are fellow, say, males. And there's no talk, you're just basically told, sex is not allowed, you are celibate. And you shouldn't even, you're kept from developing close relationships with your fellow seminarians. So you are really in a solitary bind. And since you are learning your role and learning how to, that feeling of intimacy, where you should be dating, having sexual relationships if you want to, and marrying, all that is put on pause. And these men who are in seminary get stuck. So what happens is with regards to abusive priests, they are most likely abused during childhood and seminary by their priests. And usually that priest who is the abuser was usually most likely abused himself. These abusers are emotionally and psychologically stunted because they're stuck here. And it's a vicious cycle. The adult priests are still operating with the mindset that they are on the same sexual standing as the teenagers that are under their care. The boys look up to these priests and don't want to disappoint them. And no talk of sexuality is ever taught during seminary. Most students don't understand what is happening to them. And also, if like I said earlier, the students are not allowed to have normal sexual relationships, date, marry, then they may see the sexual interactions with other priests as the only way to deal with their natural urges and loneliness. And if sexuality isn't taught or spoken about, there's no compass for these boys and young men. There's no compass for them to go by. And also, the priests, they're leaders of our community, but they also need to put a stop to being put on a pedestal by congregants, and they need to be seen as complicated human beings like everyone else. This will allow others to speak out and not feel obligated to be available to priests and others in leadership roles to be abused by them. But on the other side, if we see priests and leaders as complicated beings like us, then we can also support them in a very real way and not have fantastical expectations of them. Middle adulthood, generativity versus stagnation. Am I where I want to be? Have I accomplished everything I want to do? Am I stuck in life? This is not where I wanted to be. This is, do I have enough time to start again? And this is where I see religion as a boon, because if you have a healthy relationship, prayer and your personal relationship with God will give you strength to, no, I can do this. It's kind of a boost and allow you to take the risks you need if you feel like you're not where you feel like you've not met everything you want to by the time you hit middle adulthood. The maturity, ego integrity versus despair. I will say that I've worked with many people who are aging and are in healthcare situations. And what I have seen is they're reading the Bible daily. They're I had a man who I took care of. He was a quadriplegic. He couldn't read the Bible. So every morning before we started, I'd read a few passages. And that got him going. And that was enough for him to face the day. So his continuing practice in his faith gave him the ability to get through the difficult times in his life. And I've seen a lot of, you could say, that seeing people in going through the end stages of their life. That's important to them. I'll let you speak on that. I'll let you take the last one.
Maybe we can move on to the next slide.
I don't know where we are on time.
Right. So I think a lot of what Dana and I are wanting to think about is that it's not only a belief in the afterlife that affects how we see life now, but how we see life now, how we experience life now, as what we think the afterlife will be. Okay. So that's why we're looking at developmental psychology, because so much of how we see ourselves, how we see our lives, how we think about our lives, how we feel about our lives, is set at such a young age. And as the book that Bill recommended for us to read, Deconstructing Hell, deconstructing is a way of unpacking all of that stuff that was early set. Some psychologists say that by the age of 3, your basic emotional stance in life is set. So how you feel about things, not so much how you think about things, but your emotional stance in life is basically set by the age of 3. And my supervisor, my psychologist supervisor, used to say, if you get to the age of 3, psychologically, you can become a good neurotic. And what she meant by that was that the personality basically has enough coherence, if you can get to age 3 psychologically, that you can move forward in life with some quirks and things that you are challenging. But if you don't get to 3, there are greater problems. That's where you see personality difficulties, borderline, narcissism, those kinds of things that are really controlling and really are examples of a brittle personality, that they have to hold tight onto certain ways of being and thinking because there isn't the kind of flexibility that being a good neurotic avails you to. So one of those developmental psychologists was Melanie Klein. And she talked about in early childhood that the child then relates to the objects in its life, the father and mother and other caregivers, and will somehow take on those characteristics and internalize the examples from the object. So if the father is a hard disciplinarian, that'll be part of that personality, and maybe the mother is soft and balances that out. That also becomes part of a conversation within the person. So that's one person, Melanie Klein. She was 20, of course, later than Freud and Jung and Adler. Alice Miller, another developmental psychologist, and she worked with children. It's interesting that the first generation of psychologists basically worked with adults. And the next generation, they started working with children, recognizing that it is the childhood experience that really needs to be understood and worked with. And so she wrote a book called The Drama of the Gifted Child. She was a gifted child, so it was really autobiographical, a lot of this work. And she looked at the abuse and neglect in childhood, and those enduring effects in the life of children as they mature. Another psychologist, Donald Winnicott, talked about good enough parenting, recognizing that parenting is a challenge and there are mistakes made. But if it's good enough, if there's a sense of security, basic needs are met, it's good enough, and the child can become a good neurotic at least. One more that I didn't mention, and has really become an important part of family therapy, or marital and family therapy, is systems theory, where systems are taken over from general science, how systems work together. And Murray Bowen was the founder of this in the 50s, talked about family systems theory, recognizing that within a family you've got various roles being played by the various actors. And each system needs a certain amount of parts in order to function. And the health of a system is seen by its rigidity or flexibility. If the roles within a system are rigid, it's not a very healthy situation. If you've got the good child and you've got the bad child, you've got the domineering father and the caring mother, and they're pretty rigidly set, it's a pretty brittle and not very healthy system. But if there's flexibility among the actors within a system and a certain resilience, that is a sign of the health. That's just briefly about systems theory. What I would like to talk about now, more particularly, is what is commonly known as the honor-shame syndrome. It's present in human society across time and space. If you look at stories in history, literature, up to our present day, a basic dynamic in human relations is, are we honored or are we shamed? Do we belong? Are we esteemed? Or are we marginalized and outcast? So this has a lot to do with how we think about this life and about the life to come, or the afterlife. If we experience life with a great deal of shame, as Dana was referring to in those early childhood experiences, and we carry that shame, it can become what some call toxic. It can be the way in which we see ourselves, the way that we interact with the world. We feel that we don't have a lot of worth, we're not worth listening to, and we just kind of go through life with this heavy weight upon us, not feeling like we're worth much. In our common use of the words shame and guilt are often used interchangeably. I feel guilty about this, or I'm ashamed about this, and there isn't a great deal of distinction between the two. But psychologists will make a distinction between shame and guilt. Shame is that intense, very primitive feeling that I'm fundamentally flawed, that there's something really irredeemable about who I am as a person, and there's no possibility of changing that. That it's just a burden, a way of being that I will carry throughout. That's the only way, that the lens through which I experience life is this sense of shame. Guilt, on the other hand, can be related to an action, an offensive act or harm caused to another. And that's possible to repair, to apologize and to reconcile. And so psychologists will say that this primitive emotion can really be a dominating experience and a way, again, the lens through which people experience their life and relationship with one another. So this deconstructing, as referred to in the book, is the need to undo and unlearn the dysfunctional thoughts and beliefs about who we are as people. So thinking about the psychological effects of a belief in the afterlife, again, how we will see our lives now, how we feel about our lives now, the kinds of challenges that we've embraced in terms of maturing will affect the way we think about the life to come, the afterlife. For example, if we take a person who is essentially shame-based, grows up in a fundamentalist, as an example, household, who believes that if faith is important, and if I'm saved, the shame is taken away from me. But if people don't believe as I believe, they carry the shame and they will be punished. It's that kind of black and white distinction. Either you're saved or you're not. I remember having people come up to me saying, "Are you saved?" And I say, "Every day. Every day I'm saved." Because it isn't a once in a moment thing. It's an ongoing journey, being saved. So, again, that's the sensing that as we grow in life, we will need to look at the things in our lives that limit us. Those things that we got in childhood, even with the best parenting, we will get pieces that need to be unlearned and relearned. And so the way that we think about the afterlife will be in direct relationship to the way that we think about our life now. In the session that Nancy and I did together, I was talking about John of the Cross. And he talked about this spiritual journey which will take us into the presence of God, to see God face to face. And that along the way there are these veils that need to be torn. The veil of the senses, the veil of the spirit. So for John of the Cross, this was the process of maturing spiritually, or maturing emotionally, maturing psychologically. Those three things, I think, have a lot of overlap, those ideas. That the spiritual journey, the life journey, the emotional journey is toward further understanding and integration, and will lead us into a larger experience of life. Shame can be seen as a very confining and constricting way of experiencing life. And the goal of overcoming the shame, working through the shame and moving forward, is to have a very expansive experience of self, of a relationship, and of what life has to offer. And I trust that as John of the Cross did, that if you're experiencing that kind of expansion and wholeness and grace in life now, the afterlife is just the natural extension of what we're experiencing here and now. So the challenge for everyone is to move from, as Jung would say, from unconsciousness to consciousness, to individuate, to recognize those deep patterns within us that we've learned or inherited, and find a way of integrating them into a whole personality. As Jung would say, part of that unconsciousness is called the shadow, the part of our lives that we don't want to look at. The part of our lives that we project onto other people, the meanness, the small-minded and heartedness that at times lives within us, because the desire for revenge or to harm another person, to diminish another person in some way. That's part of our shadow. And unless we're able to deal with that part of ourselves and recognize it and bring that into consciousness and somehow live in the tension of those, what we like and what we don't like, if we aren't able to integrate that in some way in our personality, we will unfailingly put that on other people. So heaven begins now, as we've learned from Bill. That eternal life, according to John and to Paul, is something that is already happening. And if we're in that direction, if we're in that flow of our lives and finding ourselves growing and finding deeper connection and meaning, then the afterlife is to be anticipated and desired. One of my aunts just died at the age of 101. My Aunt Sadie, one of my father's brother's wives. Aunt Sadie was always the sweetest person. From the age of 4, when we went out on the bumpy road to have dinner, that's another story. Didn't know who these people were, but we had good potatoes. Anyway, I remember that part. But she died at the age of 101, and her daughter related that in the last week of her life, she was saying, "I've been looking forward to this for so long. I've been praying for this for so long, to see my Lord." And if anyone knew Sadie, you knew that she was on that journey all these years, and she was now going to tear through that last veil and have that sweet encounter. So that's essentially what Dana and I have to say, that psychology has a lot to do with how it can help us to be a lens for us as to how we look at our experience, how we look at what we've been given and the challenges that keep us from living the full life that we want, and how we can get there. So, any questions?
This is so interesting. The minute you mentioned the seminary training of many Roman Catholic priest candidates, it just clicked. It doesn't explain everything, but it explains so much of what I've observed in individuals and often puzzled about, like, where in the world did you get such a cockeyed idea about yourself and the rest of us? And you gave me a bit of a greater insight into that. They are at an early, deeply impressionable age. I mean, it's decisively in their adolescence. They're deprived of what life normally brings their way in shaping their soul, and so their souls are unshapen or lack a complete development. And I thank you for that. It doesn't solve much, but it gives insight. And also, your call for our greater compassion and understanding for them, because this is what I need to work on. I'm a bit judgmental about spiritual leaders.
You know, a good movie that illustrates that particular point about seminary, Mass Appeal. Mass Appeal with Jack Lemmon. It's set at Pomona College. That's parts of it. But, and it's All Saints Pasadena. Those are the places where it was filmed. And it illustrates the seminary dynamic. In a more modern time, I was in Roman seminaries for 8 years. And thankfully things have changed by that point. I didn't go in at 13 or 12, or that some of the guys I went to school with had started at the seminary in the age of 12. What? Yeah. And it was a real education for me, not only academically, but observing, Bill, as you're talking, observing the strangeness of seminary, the seminary world, and the lengths to which the Roman Church went to not talk about it. Yeah. It wasn't that it wasn't known, but that's all I'll say. But it's important to recognize that people don't get the way they are because they've been nurtured and had a good life. And there have been deficits along the way, impediments to growth, imposed from the outside or somehow part of the family system or whatever they are, that keep people from experiencing a full and wonderful life. And I think of Jim Sanders, that what's the basic point of our story? That life is a gift. And that if you look at the book of Genesis, what is it? Life is a gift and meant to be lived fully because it is a gift of God to be enjoyed and lived fully. Not to carry shame, not to carry some sort of sense of unworthiness about it, but to see it for what it is and live it. Nancy.
So, two things. One, when you have the stages of development circled up, and then Dana was talking about where the priests were, but it's also, I wasn't just thinking about abuse, because obviously all priests aren't abusers, but if the people that are making the theology and preaching on Sunday are stuck in an earlier stage of development, what are they preaching to people, and how are people understanding that? I'm just thinking about whole communities of shame and honor, where shame is the first part, and obviously that's not all Catholic communities or all any community. And then I was also thinking, seminary is not the only place where people are pulled out of normal life and young adulthood, like the military is a place like that, or people are trained to be certain kind of athlete, anything that pulls you out. So it was really that was interesting in that way. But then, sorry, this is a long question. Then I was thinking about the comparison of the medieval spiritual anatomy of the soul versus psychological understandings, where you'd have the intellect, the will, and appetite. It's almost the same, but there's no happy place for desire in that tripart brain. And this separation of individuals in this early monastic period comes from this early adolescent period comes from early monastic understanding to suspect all human relations as potential for temptation. And yet we still, some of their work, reach these spiritual heights, right? But I'm just thinking, I've read stuff where friendship is a possible problem. Like, you have to kind of close yourself off. And so it's almost like we're asking humans to do different kind of thing, which allows for a different understanding of hell and a different understanding of life, but it has some deep roots. Sure. This separation. It was trying to correct something. Yeah. It was interesting.
Yeah, desire is the heart of it. I mean, libido, right. Id. And that was John of the Cross's idea. How do we purify our desires? How do we understand them correctly? It doesn't mean not desiring, right, but desiring correctly. What are the things that we can expect from a human relationship, from our sexuality, from friendship, from our work? What are those things that we're seeking, and how can they be? This is not typically from the Jewish experience. Life is to be enjoyed, sexuality is to be celebrated, and life is to be lived. It was a lot of the Greek philosophers that were more manichaeistic, and that said, do away with the body, be spiritual. And it gets us into a lot of trouble. We're human beings. We're bodies and souls and minds and hearts, and somehow all trying to work together to live life. And we're meant to live it abundantly. But in John's Gospel, I came that you may have life and have it to the full. That's not going off in some mountain and not feeling and not thinking, just being. It's having life to the full. And if we're living life fully again, then the afterlife is a natural extension of that. If we're not, we might be stuck in saying, well, we're saved, but we don't really look forward to that so much. And certainly the ones who aren't saved, they're not looking forward to it either. But hopefully as people who are eager to grow in our lives of faith, our lives as human beings with one another, that we can help one another to feel free enough and safe enough, as Bill has invited us to, talk about our ideas in the next session. What is it we think about our lives and the afterlife? I was telling Bill after the first couple of sessions, I said, this is going to spark a lot of conversations. And I think this series will be really transformative because it's caused me and many others to reconsider how is it we think and feel about these things and how do they affect our lives now.
And some of the most ordinary things can impact us.
Yeah.
My mother was a very sweet Christian. She was a real theologian, and I can't remember anything that she actually taught us theologically, but she lived it, and she would tell us forever, in her deep Southern accent, when I die, I don't want you guys to be sad. I want you guys to have a party, because I will be partying. And we did our best at that moment. But notice what I've taken with me from that. Just such a deep impression, not even a verbal one, it's some kind of attitude or stance or perspective, like, okay, this is not something to be feared. Or at least it doesn't have to be. And that's enough. Yeah, that's enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you.